Good morning everyone. We have already discussed in the last lecture that the side of the neck is roughly a quadrilateral area having the following boundaries. Anteriorly, it is bounded by the anterior midline of the neck. Superiorly, it is bounded by the base of the mandible up to the angle. Then an imaginary line from the angle of the mandible up to the mastoid process. Then superior nuchal line and the external occipital protuberance. Inferiorly, it is bounded by the superior surface of the clavicle. Posteriorly, it is bounded by the anterior border of the trapezius muscle. Now, this quadrilateral area is divided by an oblique line by an oblique muscle known as the sternocleidomastoid muscle into a triangle in front of it known as the anterior triangle and a triangle behind it known as the posterior triangle. Now, in this particular lecture, we are going to discuss in detail about the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the posterior triangle of the neck. We have already covered general features about the skin, superficial fascia and the deep fascia of this neck. After studying this topic, you should be able to describe and demonstrate the boundaries of the neck, its divisions into anterior and the posterior triangle, attachment, nerve supply, relations and actions of the following muscles: sternocleidomastoid, inferior belly of omohyoid, scalenus anterior, scalenus medius, levator scapulae muscle, the boundaries and the contents of the posterior triangle. You should also be able to describe the anatomical basis of Erb's and Klumpke's paralysis, which you have already read about in upper limb, and the anatomical basis of the wry neck. Let us first talk about the two large superficial muscles of the neck, that is the sternocleidomastoid muscle and the trapezius muscle. You have already read about trapezius muscle in the upper limb along with the muscles of the back. We will discuss in detail the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So, coming to the origin of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, the muscle has two heads of origin. The sternal head, which is tendinous, takes origin from the supralateral part of the anterior surface of the manubrium sterni, whereas the clavicular head is musculotendinous in origin and it arises from the medial 1/3 of the superior surface of the clavicle. The clavicular fibers will pass deep to the sternal head and the two heads will blend with each other below the middle of the neck. Between the two heads, sometimes there is a depression, a small triangular depression known as the lesser supraclavicular fossa. The muscle is inserted by a thick tendon into the lateral surface of the mastoid process and by a thin aponeurosis into the lateral half of the superior nuchal line. So, the name is sternocleidomastoid, that is, the origin is from the sternum and the clavicle, whereas the insertion is on the mastoid process and the adjoining part of the superior nuchal line. The nerve supply of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. The motor nerve supply is by the accessory nerve, whereas the ventral rami of the C2 and the C3 cervical nerves carries the pain and the proprioceptive sensations. Coming to the actions of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. When the sternocleidomastoid muscle of one side contracts, it tilts the head towards the shoulder of the same side. It rotates the head so that the chin turns to the opposite side. So, the head is tilted towards the shoulder of the same side, whereas the head is rotated so that the chin turns towards the opposite side. So, as seen in this particular image. Now, when the sternocleidomastoid muscle of both the sides of the neck contract together. It helps in drawing the head forward as in eating and in lifting the head from a pillow. Second, along with the longer scoli muscle, it will help in flexing the neck against the resistance. The third action is when the cervical vertebrae are fixed. It may help in elevating the manubrium and the medial ends of clavicle, thereby assisting in forced inspiration. So please remember all these actions of the sternocleidomastoid muscle when it is acting unilaterally, the 2 actions, and when it is acting bilaterally, the 3 actions. Let us now discuss a case scenario. A 1-year-old girl was brought to the hospital for checkup. History revealed that she was delivered using forceps, during which she suffered soft tissue injury in the neck on right side. On examination, it was found that the head of the girl was tilted towards her right shoulder and her face is turned towards the left and upward. What is the clinical condition called? What anatomical structure is affected? Describe its attachments, nerve supply and action. Discuss the relations of its posterior border. So, which anatomical structure is affected out here? See the position in which the girl's head was there. So, it reflects that the sternocleidomastoid muscle is affected. So, you should be able to tell the attachment, nerve supply and actions. So, now let us discuss this clinical condition in detail. So, the case scenario that we discussed is the case of the torticollis, also known as the wry neck. So, torticollis or wry neck is a clinical condition in which head is bent to one side and chin points to the opposite side, and this is what is the action of the unilateral contraction of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So, there could be 2 reasons for the torticollis. It could be congenital, it could be spasmodic. So, in the congenital torticollis, what happens is that during difficult labor, there is excessive stretching of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So, a hemorrhage in the muscle appears as small tumor in early weeks. This hemorrhagic tumor is later on invaded by a fibrous tissue. The fibrous tissue will contract and shorten the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Because of this, the mastoid process is pulled down towards the sternoclavicular joint of the same side, and the cervical spine is extended and the face starts looking towards the upward to the opposite side. If this particular condition is left untreated, the asymmetrical growth changes occurs in face and the cervical vertebrae may become wedge shaped. So this is the reason for the congenital torticollis. Now, what is spasmodic torticollis? The spasmodic torticollis results from repeated chronic contractions of the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscle. It is usually psychogenic in origin. A section of the spinal part of the accessory nerve which supplies the 2 sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscle may be required in most severe cases to treat wry neck. The relations of the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle is very important, and we will discuss about it in the end when we discuss the posterior triangle in detail. Let us now begin with the posterior triangle of the neck. The posterior triangle, as I have told you, is a space on the side of the neck behind the sternocleidomastoid muscle. This posterior triangle is bounded anteriorly by the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, posteriorly by the anterior border of the trapezius muscle. The inferior pondary or the base is formed by the middle 1/3 of the clavicle. whereas the apex lies on the superior nuchal line where the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius muscles are meeting with each other. Coming to the floor of the posterior triangle. As I've already told you, the floor of the posterior triangle is formed by the prevertebral fascia. This prevertebral fascia forms the fascial carpet of the posterior triangle. Now, deep to this prevertebral fascia, the floor is formed by 4 muscles from above downwards. The splenius capitis, levator scapulae, scalenus medius and scalenus anterior muscle. Occasionally, semispinalis capitis may appear near the apex of the posterior triangle. So, the floor of the posterior triangle is formed by prevertebral fascia covering from above downwards the splenius capitis, levator scapulae, anterior scalene and the middle scalene muscles. Before coming to the roof of the posterior triangle, let us discuss here only the 3 scalene muscles which you will see in the neck. So the 3 scalene muscles are anterior scalene muscles or the scalenus anterior, middle scalene or the scalenus medius and the posterior scalene or the scalenus posterior muscle. So these 3 muscles extend from the transverse process of the cervical vertebrae up to the first 2 ribs. The anterior most is the anterior scalene, then there is middle scalene and then there is posterior scalene. On this side we have removed the anterior scalene muscle so that you can see the attachment of the middle scalene muscle. So talking first about the anterior scalene muscle. The anterior scalene muscle takes origin from the anterior tubercle of the transverse process of the C3, C4, C5 and C6 cervical vertebrae. It is inserted on the scalene tubercle, which is a ridge on the upper surface of the first rib. You all have already read about the scalene tubercle. Coming to the middle scalene muscle, this middle scalene muscle takes origin from the transverse process of the C2, from the anterior surface of the posterior tubercles of the transverse process of C3, C4, C5, C6 and C7 cervical vertebrae. The fibers come downward and they are inserted on the upper surface of the first rib, if you remember, between the scalene tubercle and the impression for the subclavian artery. Coming to the posterior scalene muscle, shown with the yellow color in this, posterior scalene muscle takes origin from the posterior tubercles, from the posterior surface of the posterior tubercles of the transverse process of C4, C5 and C6 cervical vertebrae. Then the posterior scalene muscle is inserted on the outer surface of the second rib behind the tubercles for the scalenus anterior. So before going to the details of the contents of the posterior triangle, please understand the anatomy of the 3 scalene muscles, how they are placed with respect to each other in the neck. Okay, now please see this image carefully. These are your cervical vertebrae. Okay, this is your scalenus anterior muscle. This is your scalenus medius muscle and this is your scalenus posterior muscle. So you can see this nerve is the phrenic nerve, which is formed at the lateral border of the scalenus anterior muscle, then runs along its anterior surface from lateral to medial side, and then it enters the thorax below it, where you have already read about its course. So the anterior surface of the scalenus anterior muscle is related with this phrenic nerve. Over here you can see this is the subclavian vein and from it arising the internal jugular vein. So again the carotid sheath containing the internal jugular vein is also related to the anterior surface of the scalenus anterior muscle. Then between the scalenus anterior and the scalenus medius muscle, you can see here the the trunks of the brachial plexus emerging laterally. Below that, this is the subclavian artery, which again emerges between the scalenus anterior and the scalenus medius. So please remember these relations. Right now, it will help you in understanding the contents of the posterior triangle. So the anterior surface is related with of the scalenus anterior is related with the phrenic nerve and the carotid sheath containing the internal jugular vein, whereas the posterior surface is related with the trunks of the brachial plexus and the subclavian artery. Coming to the roof of the posterior triangle. As I've already shown you and told you in this image, the roof will be formed by the skin, the superficial fascia containing platysma muscle, the 4 cutaneous nerves which we are going to talk about, few unnamed cutaneous arteries, lymphatics, and the external jugular vein. Deep to that, there is investing layer of the deep cervical fascia, which we have already discussed. So the roof is formed by the skin, superficial fascia containing platysma, the 4 cutaneous nerves, lymphatics, cutaneous vessels, and the external jugular vein, and the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia. So prevertebral layer was forming the floor and the investing layer will form the roof of the posterior triangle. Let us now discuss about the 4 cutaneous nerves. So these 4 cutaneous nerves are branches of the cervical plexus. If you remember, I have told you in the last lecture that the cervical plexus and the brachial plexus were lying deep to the prevertebral fascia, which is forming the floor of the posterior triangle. So please remember that these 4 cutaneous branches, which are the branches of the cervical plexus, will pierce the prevertebral fascia covering the floor of the triangle, and then they become the content of the posterior triangle. Then they pierce the roof formed by the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia at different points and become cutaneous and supply the skin of the side of the neck. Okay. Let us now consider each of these cutaneous nerves separately. First, the lesser occipital nerve. This lesser occipital nerve arises from the ventral rami of the second cervical C2 segment of the spinal cord. First, it is seen at the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. It then winds around and ascends along its posterior border to supply the upper 2/3 of the medial surface of the pinna at the adjoining part of the scalp. Coming to the greater auricular nerve, it is the largest ascending branch of the cervical plexus. It arises from the ventral rami of the C2 and the C3 cervical nerves, ascends on the sternocleidomastoid muscle to reach the parotid gland. There it divides into anterior and posterior branch. The anterior branch supplies the lower 1/3 of the skin on the lateral surface of the pinna and the skin over the parotid gland. This branch also connects the glands to the auriculotemporal nerve. So this cross connection is forming the anatomical basis of the Fries syndrome. Please remember it. The posterior branch supplies the lower 1/3 on the medial surface of the pinna. Coming to the third branch, that is the supraclavicular nerves. The supraclavicular nerves are formed from the ventral rami of the C3 and the C4 cervical nerves. It descends downward and diverges into 3 branches: the medial one, the intermediate one, and the lateral one. The medial one supplies the skin over the manubrium till the manubriosternal joint. The intermediate nerve crosses the clavicle to supply the skin of the first intercostal space till the second rib, whereas the lateral nerve runs across the lateral side of the clavicle and acromion to supply the skin over the upper half of the deltoid muscle. Coming to the last branch, that is the anterior cutaneous nerve of the neck or the transverse cervical nerve. This transverse cervical nerve arises from the ventral rami of the C2 and the C3 nerve and runs transversely across the sternocleidomastoid muscle to supply the skin of the neck till the sternum. So these are the details of the cutaneous nerves. So all these four cutaneous nerves are related with the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. So please remember it in relation of the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Coming to another important structure that you will encounter in the roof of the posterior triangle, the external jugular vein. Now the external jugular vein, as you have already read about it, is formed by the union of the posterior auricular vein and the posterior division of the retromandibular vein. It begins where? Within the lower part of the parotid gland. Now this external jugular vein lies deep to the platysma muscle. Okay. After its formation, it will cross the sternocleidomastoid muscle obliquely. Then at the anterior-inferior angle of the roof of the posterior triangle, it will pierce the roof and goes inside. It becomes the content of the posterior triangle. Then it terminates by opening into the subclavian vein. What are the tributaries of this external jugular vein? The tributaries includes the posterior external jugular vein, the transverse cervical vein, the suprascapular vein and the anterior jugular vein. Okay, so now think about this case. A 24-year-old woman survived a knife attack by robbers but was injured in neck. She was rushed to the hospital because of profuse bleeding. On examination, it was found that there was no deep cut in the neck. She was breathless, cyanotic and had low blood pressure. On auscultation, churning and splashing sounds masked the normal heart sounds. Physicians suspected venous air embolism. What anatomical structures are affected? So you should not have any doubt and answer. It is external jugular vein. Let us now discuss few important points about the external jugular vein. The external jugular vein acts as a venous manometer. Normally, when the patient is lying at a horizontal angle of the 30 degree, the level of the blood in the external jugular vein reaches only 1/3 of the way up to the neck. As the patient sits up, this blood level will fall until it is no longer visible behind the clavicle. However, when the venous pressure is high, for example in conditions like right heart failure, superior vena cava obstruction, increased intrathoracic pressure, the vein remains prominent throughout its course along the side of the neck. Also, the external jugular vein can be used for catheterization. This is very difficult and not usually performed. When done, the right external jugular vein is preferred for this. I've already discussed in last class about the external jugular vein injury. I'm revising it again. This is very important. Please listen carefully. This is a cross section. Here you can see the relationship of the external jugular vein. So this is skin. Deep to that in the superficial fascia, this is platysma. Over here you can see deep to the platysma lies the external jugular vein. This is sternocleidomastoid muscle and this is trapezius muscle, and in between lies the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia. So, as I have told you that the external jugular vein pierces the deep cervical fascia investing layer So as it is piercing it, the margins of the veins will get adhered to the fascia. So if the vein gets cut, it cannot retract, it cannot close. So two things will happen. There will be a lot of blood loss. Secondarily, the air is sucked in due to negative intrathoracic pressure. This might result in the air embolism. So to prevent this, the deep fascia has to be cut. So remember this point about the external jugular vein. So now before beginning the contents of the posterior triangle, let us discuss a case scenario. A young surgeon incised an abscess situated in the middle of the posterior triangle of the neck on the right side. On recovering from operation, the patient complained that she could no longer raise her right hand above her head to comb her hair. Which structure is likely to be injured, resulting in patient's disability? Now, as we discuss the posterior triangle contents, please try to find out the answer. So, the posterior triangle is subdivided further by the inferior belly of the omohyoid muscle into a larger upper part known as the occipital triangle and a smaller lower part known as the supraclavicular or the subclavian triangle. So let us now consider the two triangles separately. Talking first about the occipital triangle, let us revise the boundaries. The anterior boundary will be by the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. The posterior boundary will be by the anterior border of the trapezius. The apex will be where the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius meets. The inferior boundary will be here now by the inferior belly of the omohyoid. The roof is same as we have already discussed. The floor is formed by the splenius capitis, levator scapulae and the scalenus medius muscle. Coming to the contents of the occipital triangle, let us first talk about the nerves which you will see here. So the first content is the spinal accessory nerve. The spinal accessory nerve appears in the posterior triangle deep to the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid muscle, approximately at its junction of its upper 1/3 and the lower 2/3. The nerve will pass from downward and backward between the facial roof, that is the investing layer, and the facial floor, that is the prevertebral layer, resting on the levator scapulae muscle. Then it disappears under the cover of the anterior border of the trapezius, approximately 5 cm above the clavicle. Now please remember that the spinal accessory nerve is usually the highest and the most genuine content of the posterior triangle. Why? Because all the other nerves are lying deep to the prevertebral fascia, but the spinal accessory nerve lies in between the investing layer and the prevertebral layer. It is almost plastered to the undersurface of the investing layer. So it basically also divides the occipital triangle into a carefree triangle above and a careful triangle below, because it is the highest content and all other important structures lies below it. You will also notice the 4 cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus. As I have already told you, the lesser occipital, the transverse cervical, the lesser occipital, greater auricular, the transverse cervical and the supraclavicular, which have been cut here. So these 4 cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus will pierce the fascia covering the floor of the triangle, will pass through the triangle remaining its contents, and then it will pierce the deep fascia at different points to become cutaneous. So these 4 cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus will also form the contents of the occipital triangle before becoming cutaneous. Then the next structure that nerve you will come across here is the muscular branches from C3 and C4 to levator scapulae and the trapezius. So these are the muscular branches from C3 and C4 to levator scapulae and the trapezius muscle. So the branches to the levator scapulae will soon end in it, whereas those to the trapezius will run below and parallel to the accessory nerve and will go along with it to supply the trapezius. But remember that the spinal accessory nerve was running above the prevertebral fascia, whereas this muscular branch will run deep to the prevertebral fascia. You will also notice the branch to the rhomboids, that is the dorsal scapular nerve. So now this dorsal scapular nerve will pierce the scalenus medius and pass deep to the levator scapulae to reach the back, where it will lie deep or anterior to the rhomboidus muscle and supply them. Then you will also notice the C5, C6 roots and the upper trunk of the brachial plexus. So C5, C6 roots and the upper trunk of the brachial plexus in the occipital triangle. The other two trunks are seen in the supraclavicular triangle. Apart from that, another branch of the upper trunk, that is the suprascapular nerve. So this you can see, suprascapular nerve is also seen in the occipital triangle. So I am recalling again all the nerves that you will see in the occipital triangle. The highest content, that is the thickest and the highest nerve, that is the spinal accessory nerve. The four cutaneous branches of the cervical plexus, lesser occipital, greater auricular, transverse cervical and the supraclavicular. The muscular branches to the levator scapulae and to the trapezius. The dorsal scapular nerve. The C5, C6 roots and the upper trunk of the brachial plexus. And the suprascapular nerve arising from the upper trunk. So these nerves are seen in the occipital triangle. The suprascapular nerve, as you remember, was supplying the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus muscle. So now can you understand how it arises from the upper trunk in the occipital triangle? Then it passes backward over the shoulder to reach the scapula and it ends there by supplying the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus muscle. Let us now see the vessels which you will notice in the occipital triangle. So you see the superficial cervical artery and vein, and near the apex crossing it you see the occipital artery in the contents of the posterior triangle. The lymph nodes are not shown in the picture, but the lymph nodes are noticed in the occipital triangle near the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and near the apex, where they are known as the occipital group of lymph nodes. Coming to the supraclavicular triangle, so or the subclavian triangle, so it shares almost the same boundaries as the occipital triangle, except that superiorly it is bounded by the inferior belly of the omohyoid. So the boundaries of the supraclavicular triangle will include superiorly by the inferior belly of the omohyoid, anteriorly by the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid, below by the superior surface of the clavicle. The roof is again by the skin, superficial fascia and the investing layer of the deep cervical fascia, which is crossed by the supraclavicular nerves. Now the floor of this supraclavicular or subclavian triangle is formed by the outer border of the first strip, the scalenus medius muscle near its insertion on the first strip, and the first digitation of the serratus anterior muscle. So this differs from the floor of the occipital triangle. Repeating again, the floor of the supraclavicular triangle is formed by the outer border of the first strip, the scalenus medius near its insertion, and the first digitation of the serratus anterior muscle. Coming to the contents of the subclavian triangle. So the nerves which appear in the subclavian or the supraclavicular triangle includes the three trunks of the brachial plexus, upper, middle and the lower trunk. These three trunks of the brachial plexus emerge downward and laterally from the interval between the scalenus anterior and the scalenus medius muscle up to the outer border of the first rib. You have already read about the three trunks of the brachial plexus in the upper limb. Apart from the trunk, The long thoracic nerve, which is not seen in this image, also appears in the subclavian triangle arising from the C5, C6, C7 roots. This passes downward behind the brachial plexus and the third part of the subclavian artery and enters through the apex of the axilla. Apart from that, the third nerve which appears in this triangle includes the nerve to subclavius muscle. This nerve to subclavius muscle, over here you can see, arises from the upper trunk of the brachial plexus, carrying the fibers from the C5 and C6, passes downward in front of the brachial plexus and the subclavian vessels, and ends by supplying the subclavius muscle and the sternoclavicular joint. So what are the vessels which appear in the subclavian triangle? The most important vessel which appears here is the third part of the subclavian artery. This extends downward and laterally from the lateral border of the scalenus anterior to the outer border of the first rib, where it enters the apex of the axilla and is continued downward as the axillary artery. Okay. The subclavian vein usually lies behind the clavicle and does not appear in the subclavian triangle. Then apart from this, the terminal part or the lower part of the external jugular vein, over here you can see, so the terminal part of the external jugular vein pierces the investing layer of the deep fascia and opens into the subclavian space. Before terminating or opening in the subclavian vein, the external jugular vein receives the tributaries from the transverse cervical, suprascapular and the anterior jugular veins. Apart from this, the superficial cervical artery also begins from this part, passes laterally and upward across the floor of the posterior triangle, and then it will pass in front of the brachial plexus and the levator scapulae and ascend deep to the anterior part of the trapezius muscle. Another artery which appears in this triangle is the suprascapular artery. This suprascapular artery over here below the superficial cervical artery. So this suprascapular artery passes laterally and downward in front of the subclavian artery and the brachial plexus, behind and parallel to the clavicle, and reaches the upper border of the scapula deep to the inferior belly of the omohyoid. It then enters the